My name is Diane, and I'm 56 years old. I live in a quiet town in Oregon where everyone knows everyone, and news travels faster than the wind. People see me as calm, polite, and maybe a little overprotective when it comes to my daughter Emily. What they don't know is that I'm also the kind of woman who listens to her gut, even when it tells me something I don't want to hear. My story started on a spring afternoon, just a few hours before my daughter's wedding, when I overheard something that froze my blood. Emily had finally found what she believed was her happy ending. Her fiancé, Jason, was charming, handsome, and successful. She said he made her feel safe, loved, and seen for the first time in years. I wanted to believe that. After losing my husband 5 years earlier, all I wanted was to see my daughter happy again. But that day, while helping the florist set up the church decorations, I heard Jason talking to his best man outside. What I heard changed everything. He wasn't marrying my daughter because he loved her. He was marrying her for what she had. The way he spoke, casual and cold, as if her life and her heart were part of a business deal, made me shake. I remember holding onto a chair to steady myself, trying to process what I'd just heard. My first instinct was denial. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe it wasn't what it sounded like. But deep down, I knew better. My instincts had been whispering for months, and now they were screaming. At that moment, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just a mother helping with a wedding anymore. I became a mother on a mission. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, and I didn't panic. Instead, I made a call. A quiet, deliberate call that would change everything that happened in that church later that day. I told myself one thing. If Jason thought he could use my daughter and walk away clean, he had no idea who he was dealing with. Looking back now, people call what I did revenge. I call it survival. I didn't do it out of hatred, but out of love, the kind of love that doesn't hesitate when danger stands in front of your child. So before you judge what I did next, let me tell you how it all started. Because this story isn't about heartbreak. It's about instincts, and what happens when a mother decides she's not going to let anyone ruin her daughter's life again. I still remember the first time Emily brought Jason over for dinner. She looked so excited, practically glowing, and I hadn't seen that light in her eyes since her father passed away. Jason walked in like he'd stepped out of a magazine. Tall, clean-cut, perfectly pressed button-down shirt, designer watch, polished shoes, and that confident smile that people either find charming or suspicious, depending on their age. I offered him my hand, and he shook it with both of his. The kind of overly warm gesture that's supposed to say I'm genuine, but it felt rehearsed. He complimented the roast chicken before he even tasted it, told me he'd heard all about me, and said he couldn't wait to become part of the family. It was all very smooth. Too smooth. I've lived long enough to know when someone's being polite and when someone's performing. Jason? He was performing. That didn't mean he was dangerous. At the time, I told myself it just meant he wanted to impress me. But there was something about the way he carried himself, like he already knew how the night would go. He asked about Emily's childhood, our house, her father's work, all in a tone that was casual but slightly calculated. He nodded along when I told stories, laughed at the right moments, and even helped clear the table. I couldn't point to one thing that felt off, but by the time dessert was served, I had a tiny knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. He said he worked in wealth management. He had his own clients, did independent consulting, and liked the flexibility of running his own business. Emily beamed with pride every time he spoke. At one point, when Emily stepped out to take a phone call, Jason looked around the living room and asked if the house was paid off. He phrased it like small talk, something about real estate trends and the market in our area, but it struck me as an odd question. I smiled and gave a vague answer. He didn't press, but he didn't need to. That tiny knot in my stomach tightened just a bit more. Over the next few weeks, Jason became a regular at our Sunday dinners. He brought wine that cost more than my week's groceries, told stories about clients with vacation homes and yachts, and somehow always knew just what to say to charm the room. He asked about our family history, where Emily's inheritance had come from, and what I planned to do with my retirement. All under the umbrella of friendly conversation. I never caught him saying anything explicitly wrong, but he said just enough to make me feel like I was being sized up. He had answers for everything. When I asked where he went to school, he said Stanford. I asked what year. He told me with a smile and threw in the name of a professor. I looked that professor up later. He did teach there. Years ago. The thing was, Jason was always one step ahead. He anticipated questions before they were asked, and every detail of his life felt curated, as if it had been constructed to look perfect from every angle. Emily was happier than I'd seen her in years. She called him the best thing that ever happened to her. She said he made her feel like she could finally relax, like she didn't have to be strong all the time. And as a mother, that's all I ever wanted for her. But something didn't sit right. There's a difference between charming and calculated, between thoughtful and strategic. I started keeping a notebook. Every time something didn't add up, I wrote it down. Like the time he said he'd grown up in Boston, but didn't recognize a single local reference I casually brought up. Or the time he claimed to have met a senator at a fundraiser, but mispronounced the senator's name. Or when he told Emily that he'd gotten a deal on a car from an old friend, yet the plates were registered out of state to a rental agency. Small things, things most people wouldn't notice. But I did. The more perfect Jason seemed, the more uneasy I became. And the worst part was, I couldn't talk to Emily about any of it. She was head over heels in love. Every concern I voiced made me sound suspicious or jealous. So, I said nothing. I smiled through dinners and toasted their engagement with a glass of champagne I didn't even taste. But behind the scenes, I started paying attention, because something about Jason was off, and I was determined to figure out what it was, before it was too late. It started subtly. Like most things that are meant to slip past you, Jason had this way of easing financial questions into casual conversation, always wrapped in concern or curiosity. He'd ask how I was adjusting to life on one income, or if I'd considered moving to something smaller since the house must feel empty now. Once, while Emily was in the kitchen grabbing dessert, he asked how her father had arranged our finances. Not in a direct way, but something like whether David had set up a trust, or if everything had gone through insurance. I answered lightly, just enough to be polite, but inside, I felt that tight tug again. That wasn't dinner talk. Not for someone who'd only been around a few months. Another night, he complimented my garden, and somehow used it to pivot into whether I'd ever considered refinancing. He knew interest rates were low, and said now might be a good time to tap into some equity for retirement. I nodded, but didn't bite. I wasn't sure if he was trying to help, or fishing for numbers. Then came questions about Emily. He asked what she planned to do with her inheritance, if she was still keeping it in a conservative savings account. He suggested that more aggressive growth could give her financial freedom sooner. I told him Emily had always been cautious with money. He smiled and said that was smart, but also added that playing it too safe could mean missing big opportunities. Jason never pressed too hard. That was the genius of it. Every question felt like part of a bigger conversation, always friendly, never demanding. But when you step back and look at them together, you see the pattern. He was building a map. Slowly, carefully, question by question. I didn't have hard proof, just instincts and a list of red flags that most people would call harmless. But when someone's more interested in your assets than your hobbies, when they ask more about bank accounts than birthdays, it's not curiosity, it's preparation. And I was starting to realize Jason wasn't just dating my daughter, he was studying her. Studying all of us. I knew I couldn't keep standing on the sidelines hoping I was wrong. My gut had been waving red flags for weeks, and Jason's charm had worn thin. I needed answers, not feelings. So I called an old friend from college, Monica, who now worked as a private investigator. She owed me a favor, and I cashed it in with no hesitation. Monica agreed to take a look into Jason's background quietly. I didn't want Emily to know anything until I had facts, not suspicions. Within a few days, Monica called me back, sounding unsettled. She couldn't find any financial certifications under the name Jason Whitman. No state licensing, No registered business, no tax filings, nothing. He was a ghost. It got worse. She expanded her search and found a man matching Jason's age and face, who'd been arrested in Nevada 3 years ago for financial fraud. The mugshot wasn't pixel perfect, but it was close enough to twist my stomach. That man had used the name Jeremy White, not Jason Whitman. And just like Jason, he'd been accused of scamming women out of their money. The case was dropped after the victim stopped cooperating. Maybe she was ashamed. Maybe she was threatened. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that I now had reason to believe my daughter's fiancé wasn't who he claimed to be. I stood in my kitchen staring at the printouts Monica had sent, each one tightening the knot in my chest. There was no more room for doubt. No more hoping I was just being paranoid. I'd seen enough to know the truth. This wasn't a love story. It was a setup. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat in the quiet, and stared at the picture of Emily on the mantel. She looked so happy, so trusting. And I realized something crystal clear. If I didn't act now, she was going to lose everything. So I made a decision. No more silence. No more pretending. Jason had played the wrong woman's daughter, and I was about to become his worst mistake. By the time Jason and Emily set a date for the wedding, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. Monica had given me the breadcrumbs, but I needed something undeniable, something that couldn't be spun as a misunderstanding or a coincidence. So I asked her if she had access to surveillance gear. She hesitated, said it wasn't exactly legal, but after I told her what I suspected Jason was planning, she didn't argue. 2 days later, she handed me a tiny black recording device no larger than a car key. The plan was simple. Jason was always on the phone in his car. He liked to take calls in private, usually after dinner when he thought no one was paying attention. So one evening, when he came over and left his car unlocked in our driveway, I slipped outside and tucked the recorder under the passenger seat. It was set to activate with sound. Then I waited. The first few days were uneventful. Hours of Jason, talking about wine pairings, gym routines, and random vendor updates for the wedding. Nothing suspicious, nothing solid. But I kept listening, night after night, sometimes until my ears ached. I was starting to think I'd made a mistake. That maybe he'd gotten smarter, or worse, maybe he wasn't the same man from Nevada. Then, one Thursday evening, I got what I needed. Jason was in the car with someone named Alex. From the way they talked, Alex was either a partner or someone Jason trusted enough to drop the act. I heard Jason laugh and say that once the vows were done, everything would be easy. He said Emily's trust fund would be his to manage, and that her mother still had untouched assets from her husband's life insurance. He actually used the words low-hanging fruit. He said Emily had abandonment issues and would do anything to keep him happy. He even joked that if she got suspicious, he'd charm his way out with a weekend getaway and some flowers. Alex didn't say much, just grunted and asked about the timeline. Jason said he needed 6 months. 6 months of marriage, then he'd start the exit plan. He said he had fake accounts set up already. Offshore. Clean. I sat frozen at my kitchen table, clutching my headphones. I rewound the recording and listened again. It was all there. The manipulation. The plan. The lies. He wasn't just after Emily's inheritance. He was already planning his escape. The next day, I copied the file to 2 flash drives and uploaded it to a cloud account under a fake name. Just in case. I sent a copy to Monica. I didn't want to confront him yet. Not until I was absolutely sure I could stop the wedding. For a week, I kept up the act. Smiling at dinners, helping Emily choose centerpieces, pretending to be the mother of the bride. Meanwhile, every night, I replayed the recording, reminding myself why I had to hold my tongue. Emily was still in love. Still blind. And if I blew this too soon, Jason would vanish before we could stop him. I needed one more thing. So I made an appointment with a family friend, Detective Ray Mercer. I told him everything. I played the recording in his office. He sat back in his chair and let out a slow breath. Then he said one word. Finally, Turns out, I wasn't the only one watching Jason. There had been other complaints, but nothing had stuck. No one had ever gotten this far before. Ray said if I could get him at the wedding, surrounded by witnesses, it would be a perfect takedown. But it had to be airtight, no room for him to squirm. We planned every detail. Backup units would wait outside. I would give the signal during the ceremony, and when it was time, Jason would find out exactly who he'd been trying to con. I left the station that day not scared, but steady. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't guessing. I had proof. And soon, my daughter would too. The wedding was 9 days away, and the clock was ticking. The church looked beautiful. White roses lined the aisle. Soft music filled the air, and sunlight streamed through stained glass windows like something out of a postcard. Guests whispered excitedly, turning in their seats as the bridal party began to walk down the aisle. Emily appeared at the doors, radiant in her dress, smiling like she was walking into her future. Jason stood at the altar, calm and polished, just as I expected. He played the part right up to the final moment. My hands were clenched around my purse, the flash drive inside it pressing into my palm. The recording was cued on my phone. I knew I had one chance to get this right. Reverend Carter began the ceremony, his voice warm and practiced. Vows were exchanged. Rings slipped onto fingers. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. If anyone here has reason this couple should not be joined in marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace. I stood up. The room fell silent. Chairs creaked as people turned to look at me. My heart pounded, but my voice was steady. I said I had something the bride needed to hear. Jason turned pale. Emily looked confused. The Reverend paused, uncertain. I walked slowly to the front, pulled out my phone, and hit play. Jason's voice filled the sanctuary. Calm, calculated, cold, talking about bank accounts, access to Emily's inheritance, and calling my life insurance policy low-hanging fruit. There were gasps. Someone dropped a program. Emily's face twisted from confusion to horror as the words kept playing. Jason tried to step forward, but I raised my hand to stop him. His mask cracked right there in front of everyone. Then, from the back of the church, I saw the officers enter. Quiet, deliberate, like they'd done this before. Jason turned, saw them, and made a run for the side door. He didn't get far. One of the officers was already waiting by the exit. They tackled him outside, and I could hear the scuffle from inside the church. Guests rushed to the windows. Emily just stood there, frozen in the spot where she'd been moments from saying "I do." I reached for her, but she pulled back, staring at the floor. The Reverend asked if we should pause. I told him there would be no wedding today. Jason was escorted out in cuffs, head down, refusing to make eye contact. The crowd began to murmur. Some were shocked. Others whispered they had always thought he seemed too slick. I walked back to my daughter, gently took her hand, and told her I was sorry, that I did what I had to do. She didn't say anything. She just leaned into me, trembling. We sat down together in the front pew, watching the chaos unfold like it was happening in someone else's life. I felt a strange mix of relief and heartbreak. Justice had landed, right on cue. But the price of truth was never cheap, and today, it cost my daughter her fairy tale. But better a broken illusion than a lifetime of lies. Jason picked the wrong family, and he'd never see another aisle again unless it had bars at the end of it. The weeks after the wedding were quiet. Emily stayed with me for a while, barely speaking at first. She would sit on the back porch with her coffee, just staring at the trees, trying to make sense of everything. Some days she cried. Some days, she didn't speak at all. But slowly, the silence began to shift. She started asking questions. Not about Jason, but about herself. Why had she not seen it sooner? Why did she want so badly to believe in something that wasn't real? I told her what I knew to be true. That love isn't weakness, and trust isn't foolish. That healing isn't about forgetting, but about choosing what to carry forward. She began volunteering at a local women's shelter, talking with women who'd been through worse and come out stronger. That's where she met David. He wasn't flashy or smooth. He was quiet, kind, and never once made her feel like she had to prove anything. It took months for her to open up to him. But he waited. When she introduced him to me, she smiled like herself again. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to watch every move he made. We checked him out anyway, just to be safe. Clean as a whistle. It's been over a year now. They're not rushing into anything. And that's fine by me. Emily learned how to trust again. This time with eyes wide open. And me? I've learned that a mother's instincts are rarely wrong. Sometimes the strongest kind of love is the kind that stands between your child and the danger they can't see. Not to fight their battles, but to make sure they live long enough to win their own.